This is RichardDWolff with another Wolff Responds for our Patreon community. I want to talk with you today about the protests that have been sweeping across the United States in the aftermath of another police shooting of a Black American citizen. This is an interesting moment in American history, a turning point, if I can guess, about the future. A turning point because injustices and inequalities that have accumulated over the last 40 years and that go back much further into the depths of American history, those accumulated injustices, outrages, tragedies have now finally produced the uprising that was always coming but took a long time. What do I mean? I mean that we are in the midst of a prolonged war, a class war, in which the employer class, a small minority, wages war on the mass of people, basically the labor force, the 160 million Americans, who produce the goods and services we all depend on. Those 160 million are under assault. They have been for decades. Their real wages, which is the money they earn compared to the prices they have to pay, have not gone up in 35 years. They compensated for the loss of a rising income, such as they had had before, by having more members of the family go out to do more labor hours, and by borrowing more money than any working class in the history of the world has ever labored under. By 2008, as we know, the combination of physical and mental exhaustion on the one hand, and unsupportable, unsustainable debts on the other, collapsed the capitalist economy that had relied on exhausting the workers and lending them the money that used to have been paid in wages. It was impossible, and the system folded. Capitalism as a system survived, as it usually has in the last 300 years. It figured out how to keep the system going without changing it, forcing people back into the very roles, the same inequality, the same unsustainable debts that had led them into the crash. And sure enough, by 2020, when confronted with another one of those viruses that periodically plague the human race, an exhausted U.S. capitalism fell apart. In a matter of 9 weeks, 40 million people were thrown out of work. Together with having to stay at home because of the failed response, the lack of testing for the virus, you put the American working class under unspeakable pressure. Would the job even be there after you come off of unemployment? Who knows? Will you get sick? Who knows? How will you cope with life under these uncertainties? Who knows? And then the great anxiety of the 40 million unemployed. Will the job even be there when I come back? How am I ever going to pay my debts? It's impossible what you subjected the working class to. And in case you're one of those 120 million who still have a job, let me explain something to you about how capitalism works. It's called the system of competition. Employers compete with one another. And you know what they try to do? Lower the cost of production so they can lower their price and beat their competitor. And you know how they're going to lower the cost of production? They're going to cut your wage. They're going to cut your benefits. They're going to ask you to come in a half an hour earlier, leave a half an hour later, and take a shorter lunch break. And if you say I won't tolerate it, fine, the employer will say. Go ahead and quit. I got 40 million people getting more desperate each week to have some job, any job. They'll take the job at the now reduced arrangements I offered you. You think the laboring working class in this country has been under pressure? That is nothing to the pressure this system is now putting them on. We went from 4% to 25% unemployment. In Germany, it went from 5% to 6%. Nowhere in Europe do they have the capacity to stick it to their working classes. Those are capitalist countries. They just can't do to their workers what the United States' capitalists, especially led by Mr. Trump, have every intention of doing. And how do they hope to survive this one? This catastrophic, worst since 1929 economic collapse, coupled with their failed management of the virus. They use the same old methods, don't they? Divide the workers who are angry. Make the white ones angry at the black ones. Make the black ones angry at the white ones. Make the population furious at the cops, and vice versa. Beat themselves up, one the other. Who cares among those at the top? They're laughing all the way to their banks. Will it work? You never know. Will this be the time when white and black people understand that the system is the problem, not each other? Will they be able to get over the terrible repression, discrimination suffered by African Americans for hundreds of years in this country? Will they? It'll be hard. That's why it's worked so well to keep capitalism in place. But it's the key issue. Don't be divided. And learn the power of organizing yourselves. Making a movement, political, economic, cultural, everywhere, that makes the ideas that you don't treat people this way. You don't throw 40 million people under the bus because your capitalism doesn't work and you couldn't figure out, the way every other country could, how to handle this virus. And for those of you who still don't know, here's the statistic that should make it clear. I'll give you two. One, the United States has 5% of the world's people, but we have 30% of the world's dead by virtue of the coronavirus. Mr. Trump says we have the greatest medical system in the world. Really? A rich country with only 5% of the people suffers 30% of the deaths. Case closed. And here's another statistic. In 2019, police in the United States killed 1,004 people. Police in England and Wales, over the same year period, killed 3 people. In Australia, 9 people. In Denmark, no people. In Japan, 2 people. You get the point? We use the division among people, right up until killing large numbers, to keep a system in place that could not save us from a pandemic, could not save us from an economic crash, and now plunges this country into the further deepening inequality as every employer uses the unemployment imposed by the system to keep the system going with even worse inequality than it had before. Friends, enemies, the system is over. It cannot support the society into which it was born, in which it grew, and in which it must now pass away to make room for a system that works better for most people than this one has shown it can. This is Richard Wolff for Democracy at Work, with a Wolff Responds for our Patreon community.